You are standing in a grocery store, and a stranger is looking at you a half second too long. It's a small thing. You've posted online for a few years now, built a modest following, and every so often someone recognizes your face from a screen. This time, they walk over, ask if you're that person from the internet, and you say yes, a little embarrassed, and they smile and walk away happy. It feels good. It also feels, for one brief moment, like something has shifted, like you are no longer only a person, but also, in some small way, a public object other people get to have an opinion about. You have no idea, standing in that grocery store aisle, how far this feeling can scale, or what it costs at every level along the way, from a stranger's second glance, all the way up to a level of fame so total that you can no longer walk outside without a plan, a team, and an exit strategy. This is your life at every level of fame. The first level of fame is so small, it barely feels like fame at all. And that's exactly what makes it dangerous. At this stage, you're recognized by a genuinely tiny slice of the population. Followers of a niche hobby, a local community, a small online following. The psychological effect, though, is disproportionately large, because your brain isn't built to distinguish between 100 people recognize me and everyone recognizes me. Recognition itself, even from a handful of strangers, triggers the same basic social reward circuitry that recognition from an entire nation eventually will. This is the first hint of something that stays true at every single level of fame you'll pass through. The psychological experience of being recognized doesn't scale linearly with the actual number of people who recognize you. 100 strangers and 100 million strangers register to your nervous system as a startlingly similar kind of jolt, just with the volume turned up. At this level, the actual practical costs are almost zero. You can still walk anywhere unbothered nearly all the time. The handful of people who do recognize you are usually genuinely enthusiastic rather than invasive. They sought you out specifically because they like what you do. So the interaction tends to be warm rather than transactional. Historically, this is the level most performers, writers, and public figures across centuries lived their entire careers at. Known well within a specific circle, a guild, a court, a city, but essentially anonymous the moment they left that specific context. A celebrated poet in one Italian city-state during the Renaissance, for instance, might be warmly greeted at every gathering within that city and completely unrecognized 3 days' travel away, a level of fame that, by modern standards, would barely register as fame at all. But that shaped that person's entire social experience within their world. The danger at this level isn't the fame itself. It's what it does to your expectations. You start, almost without noticing, calibrating your sense of self-worth around a feedback loop that used to be optional. Before this level, whether strangers knew who you were had no bearing on your daily mood. Now, a small, quiet part of your brain starts checking for it. And that quiet checking habit, once installed, tends to persist and intensify at every level of fame that follows, whether you want it to or not. The next level is where fame stops being something warm that happens occasionally and starts becoming a structural feature of your daily life. At this stage, well known within an entire industry, a regional media market, or a large online audience numbering in the hundreds of thousands to low millions, you can no longer assume any public space is neutral. Recognition becomes frequent enough that you start making small, unconscious adjustments. Which entrance you use, what time you go to familiar places, how you dress when you leave the house. None of this rises to the level of true precaution yet. It's closer to a background hum of low-grade calculation that simply becomes part of how you move through the world. Here's a detail that surprises people about this specific level. This is often, historically and today, the level at which public figures report the worst ratio of cost to benefit. You're famous enough that strangers feel entitled to comment on your appearance, your choices, and your perceived flaws. The internet-era version of this involves direct, constant public commentary in a way no earlier era of fame had to contend with. But you're not yet famous enough to have the resources, security, or infrastructure that genuinely global fame eventually provides to buffer against it. Historical accounts from actors and public figures in the early to mid-20th century, before large-scale professional publicity infrastructure matured, describe exactly this uncomfortable middle zone. Famous enough to be constantly watched and judged by a large audience, but without the layers of professional protection that came standard once the entertainment industry built more robust systems around managing fame decades later. At this level, your relationships start to change in a specific, measurable way. Old friends sometimes begin treating you slightly differently, not always negatively, but noticeably, because you now occupy a different social category than you did a year or two earlier. And human social instincts are extremely sensitive to status shifts within a friend group, even when nobody involved wants that to be true. New people you meet increasingly arrive with some pre-formed idea of who you are, based on whatever public version of you they've encountered, which means you spend more and more of your social energy either confirming or correcting an image you didn't fully choose yourself. This is also the level at which financial reality shifts dramatically for the first time. Fame at this stage frequently converts into real, substantial income, endorsement opportunities, media appearances, brand deals, often for the first time in your life at a scale that changes your actual day-to-day existence. But it also introduces an entirely new kind of stress. Your income at this level is frequently tied directly to your continued visibility and public approval, in a way most careers never are. A software engineer's paycheck doesn't depend on whether the public likes their face this month. Yours increasingly does. At the next level, something changes that can never fully be undone. You lose the option of choosing anonymity in almost any public setting for the rest of your life. This is the level most people mean when they say famous without qualification, recognized broadly across an entire country or a significant global audience, discussed regularly in mainstream media, and instantly identifiable to strangers in nearly any public setting you enter. At this stage, going anywhere without being recognized requires genuine, deliberate effort. Disguises, planned routes, advanced security, or simply not going at all. Historical figures who reached this level, major film stars from the mid-20th century onward, for instance, describe a very specific and consistent phenomenon across decades and across countries. The sudden, disorienting realization that ordinary tasks everyone else takes for granted, like walking down a street or sitting in a park, now require active planning and risk assessment. Here's a genuinely strange detail about this level that surprises people. The sheer scale of attention can become physically dangerous, not through any single person's malice, but simply through crowd dynamics. Historical accounts of major public figures being mobbed by enthusiastic, well-meaning crowds, fans who love them and mean no harm at all, describe situations that became genuinely life-threatening, purely from crowd density and crush, with people being injured. Or worse, not because anyone wished them harm, but because enough bodies pressed toward a single point creates dangerous physical forces regardless of anyone's actual intentions. This is a documented pattern across multiple eras and multiple countries' experiences with peak mainstream fame. The crowd itself becomes a force independent of any individual's feelings toward you. At this level, your professional life and your personal identity begin to blur in a way that's difficult to reverse. The public version of you, the persona built from interviews, performances, and media coverage, starts to feel, to nearly everyone you meet, more real and more relevant than whatever private version of yourself you're still quietly maintaining underneath it. Many public figures at this level describe a specific, disorienting experience, meeting someone who clearly feels they already know you intimately, based entirely on consuming your public output, creating a strange one-sided intimacy where a stranger's sense of closeness to you vastly outpaces your own sense of closeness to them. Financially, this typically brings genuine wealth and, alongside it, an entire team: managers, publicists, security, financial advisors, an entire structure that exists specifically to manage the practical logistics of your fame. This is both a genuine relief compared to the mid-level chaos of the previous stage, and its own kind of cost. Your daily life is now filtered through and mediated by an entire professional apparatus, meaning the version of normal life available to you at this level looks almost nothing like normal life looks to literally anyone else you know outside that apparatus. At the highest level, the small handful of names in any given era who become globally, near universally recognizable. Fame stops being about you as a specific person at all and becomes almost entirely about what you represent to millions of people who will never meet you. At this level, you are, in a very real sense, no longer fully a private individual in the way ordinary people understand that concept. Your image, your name, and your public moments become raw material. Other people build their own meaning from nostalgia, aspiration, cultural identity, sometimes even political or religious-adjacent significance, entirely independent of your actual intentions or private reality. Historical figures who reached this level of fame, a handful of entertainers, athletes, and public figures across the 20th and 21st centuries, describe an experience of watching their own name and image become something other people feel entitled to argue about, interpret, and claim ownership over, in ways the actual person often has limited ability to correct or control. Here's a detail that captures just how total this level of fame becomes. Historical records from crowds gathering around the most famous public figures of a given era. Massive public farewells, arrivals, and public appearances by the most famous entertainers of the 20th century describe crowd sizes and public reactions that required entirely new categories of security planning, sometimes involving national governments and law enforcement agencies coordinating specifically because a single public figure's movement through a city had become, functionally, an event of national logistical significance. At this level, the isolation compounds in a specific way that lower levels of fame don't fully prepare you for. Nearly everyone you meet for the rest of your life meets you already knowing an enormous amount about you, and often already having strong feelings about you before you've said a single word to them. Building new, genuinely equal relationships becomes exceptionally difficult, because true equality in a relationship generally requires both people entering the interaction on roughly similar footing, a condition that simply stops being available to you at this level for the rest of your life, with almost everyone you'll ever meet. The historical pattern across nearly every person who has reached this absolute peak level of fame is remarkably consistent. The private, personal cost tends to scale right alongside the public glory, almost in direct proportion. And there is no level of professional support structure, however extensive, that fully insulates a person from what it means to no longer be able to simply exist, unnoticed, in the world you live in. Nobody standing in that grocery store aisle, enjoying one stranger's brief moment of recognition, can actually picture what the far end of this scale looks like. But across every era and every field, music, film, sport, politics, and now the entirely new landscape of internet fame, thousands of people have climbed some portion of this same ladder, chasing a feeling that, at every single level, delivers real and genuine rewards, alongside a cost that quietly compounds the higher you climb, until the version of your life the public sees and the version you're actually living underneath it have almost nothing left in common. Some stop climbing happily at the first small taste, precisely because they're wise enough to recognize what the next level actually costs. Some reach the very top and spend the rest of their lives trying to find their way back to something resembling an ordinary human interaction. All of them, at every level, discover the same underlying truth. Fame doesn't change who you are. It changes, permanently and often irreversibly, what everyone else believes they're entitled to about who you are. This was your life at every level of fame. If any part of this surprised you, let me know in the comments which level you think you'd actually want to stop at. And if you want to know what happens to fame after you die, how some historical figures actually became more famous decades after their deaths than they ever were in life, that video is coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.